White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt effectively admitted that United States President Donald Trump discussed strikes on Moscow and St. Petersburg with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. According to reports from the Financial Times and the Washington Post, Donald Trump asked Volodymyr Zelensky whether Ukraine could strike these cities. After that, Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine could do so if the United States provided it with the appropriate weapon. Currently, the long-range missiles that Ukraine has at its disposal, even if the United States were to grant permission, cannot reach Moscow or St. Petersburg. However, if the United States, for example, supplies Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, the possibility of striking targets in these two major Russian cities becomes entirely realistic. The White House spokesperson accused both publications of releasing this information to boost their own popularity and emphasized that Donald Trump did not call for further killings, but was merely asking questions. However, of course, one could add their own comment to this statement. And why would someone even be interested in the possibility of strikes on Moscow? Of course, one may not explicitly call for such strikes. However, when the President of the United States asks the leader of any other country whether they are capable of striking Russian capitals, he is of course not doing so to gain some information about geography, but rather to understand what level of escalation might occur in the war if, for example, the United States decides to provide additional weapons to Ukraine. It could be said that Trump is trying to play by Putin's own rules. He is sending signals. A signal like the one that appeared in the Financial Times and the Washington Post is of course not accidental, and it is absolutely not a coincidence that the White House spokesperson confirmed the fact of such a conversation between Trump and Zelensky. As we understand, she could have denied it and accused both publications of spreading fake news. What happened was exactly the opposite. Now, in Moscow, they know that not only did Trump talk to Zelensky about the possibility of strikes on Moscow and St. Petersburg, but he isn't even trying to hide it. Let us now carefully recall that when the esteemed President of the United States, Donald Trump, gave Tehran a very strict 60-day ultimatum during which he meticulously planned to reach a comprehensive agreement with Iran, Trump emphatically emphasized that if no such agreement was ultimately reached, something truly very unpleasant and potentially disastrous could indeed happen. And when those 60 days had passed, literally on the 61st day, Israel struck the most important strategic sites of the Islamic Republic. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emphasized that he was doing this precisely after Trump's ultimatum had expired. And in this situation, the Russian leadership can draw a simple parallel for itself and ask the question, what might happen after the 50 days of the ultimatum that Trump has effectively issued to Russian President Putin pass? Sanctions will simply be imposed on Russian oil, and China or India will face problems. Or by that time, the United States may provide Ukraine with weapons that could be, to put it mildly, unpleasant for the top political and military leadership of the Russian Federation. And then Moscow will be faced with a stark choice whether to proceed with further escalation up to and including the use of nuclear weapons in a war with completely unpredictable consequences from such use for Russia itself and for its future relations with the United States. After all, no one knows how Donald Trump would react to a nuclear strike on Ukraine. Or, alternatively, to seek ways to end the hostilities before those 50 days are up and before Trump might advise the Ukrainian president to take more radical and decisive actions against Putin's Russia. Well, it has become obvious that Putin is now trying to figure out how to deal with the American president in a situation where simply stalling for time and deceiving Trump's expectations is no longer working. This is evident, at least from the words of the press secretary of the president of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Peskov, who, unlike other Russian officials, says that Putin is carefully studying Donald Trump's statements and will comment on them himself. That is, all the comments we are hearing today, including the brazen statement by former president of the Russian Federation and deputy chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, who simply laughed at Donald Trump and the confident statement by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who emphasized that Russia can withstand any sanctions there, not yet the official reaction. This is a reaction primarily aimed at the Russian people themselves. A chemical reaction that is supposed to be completed at the disposal of Russian propagandists, who also need to understand how they should respond to the actual change in attitude of the American president toward his once favorite Russian counterpart. But the real political reaction, with an understanding of what the Kremlin should do about possible unpredictable actions by the President of the United States, this real reaction may appear after some time, and it will be voiced personally by the President of the Russian Federation. I have no doubt that right now in the Kremlin, at the level of the permanent members of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, among colleagues from the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, and the top leaders of Russia's foreign intelligence service, and let's not forget Putin's closest circle recommendations are being developed for the president of Russia on how he should respond to the unpredictable and disappointed Donald Trump. And the fact that at this very moment information emerges that the president of the United States asked the president of Ukraine about the possibility of strikes on Moscow and St. Petersburg, Putin's hometown, can, of course, to some extent change the trajectory of thinking for all those people who are developing their recommendations for the president of Russia regarding his response to possible further actions by Donald Trump. And of course, this will also change the trajectory of Putin's own thinking, who naturally does not really want to be present when strikes are carried out on Russian capitals. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel and subscribe. Subscribe to my social media, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Donatel. Support the development of these resources and use the sponsorship feature right here on YouTube. Victory. Peace. Good luck.